Our next panelist, Avvy will be talking about family class sponsorship, a pathway to independence. Avvy is the clinic director of Metro Toronto Chinese and Southeast Asian Legal Clinic. She received her BA in Economics and Management Studies from the University of Waterloo, and LLB from the University of Toronto, and LLM from Osgoode Hall Law School. Since her call to the bar in 1991, she has worked exclusively in the legal clinic system, serving the legal needs of low-income individuals and families, the majority of whom are non-English speaking immigrants and refugees. Immigration, human rights, and employment law are some of the main areas of law that she practices in. Welcome, Avvy.
I was still writing my speech. Sorry. Well, because I think I have to change course. I'm like the fifth or sixth speaker. So thank you for inviting me here to this important national symposium. As the introduction said, I work in a community legal clinic, the Metro Toronto Chinese and Southeast Asian Legal Clinic, and we serve low-income people from the Chinese and Cambodian, Laotian, and Vietnamese community in the Greater Toronto area. And because of the client we serve, so immigration law is a huge component of what we do in terms of our advocacy work. Although I was going to talk more about the family class sponsorship, but I think a lot of the issues have been discussed. So I'm going to change my focus a little bit. I will still talk about one aspect of the family class. The title of my panel got chopped off a little bit, but anyway, so it's I'm trying to suggest that in fact it is no longer a pathway to independence. But also I want to focus a little bit about the citizenship law changes because, as some of you may know, Bill C-24, which is the new Citizenship Act, got third reading, passed its third reading yesterday. So this is a new issue for all of us to focus on. And then finally, I'm going to talk about some of the advocacy opportunities for all of us to consider. So I'll start with the family class. One of the fundamental objectives of Canada's immigration law is, in fact, to have families reunited in Canada. And indeed, for many years, family class immigrants were the majority of all the immigrants who came to Canada. Until early 1990s, like over 50% of immigration to Canada were family class immigration. And my family, or part of my family, came before the 90s, and we were part of the beneficiary of that policy. But since then, the proportion and absolute number of family class immigration has continued to decline. To today, it's like less than 25%. And while there are many more men than women who will be the sponsor, and many more women than men who are the sponsored, women as sponsors is also an important issue, I think. And I think previous speakers focused more on a situation where the women are the sponsored spouse. I want to focus on women who want to sponsor the family over, because I think it is, as some of the speakers also allude to, part of the problems and challenges faced by women who are in domestic violence is because they are the only one here. Apart from their husband, they have no other family member. They don't have parents, brothers, sisters who are here to support them. There's no family network. So the ability to sponsor, to bring your family over, is part of an important strategy, I think, for women to build their own network of support. Yet one of the main barriers for women to act as sponsor is the minimum necessary income requirement under the immigration law, which basically says, and I'm sure all of you know, if you want to sponsor your parents, grandparents, adult dependent children of the parents, you have to meet the low income cutoff requirement. Before 2014, it's the LICO requirement. Since January 1st, 2014, it's LICO plus 30%. So on its face, that requirement affects everyone equally. All sponsors have to meet the requirement. But of course, as we know, because if you need money, you need to meet the income requirement to sponsor. That means if you're poor, you won't be able to. And who are the poor in our country now? Well, racialized immigrants, women, racialized people in general, people with disability. Those are the people who are more likely to live in poverty and therefore more likely to not able to meet the low-income cutoff requirement. And I want to just highlight some of the stats. If you look at the Statistics Canada census from 1996 to 2006, it shows that there is a general gendered and racialized effect of employment income in Canada. So between 1996 and 2001, racialized group members and new immigrants who are themselves highly racialized sustained a double-digit income gap and a higher rate of low income compared to the non-racialized group. The median after-tax income for racialized persons was 23.2% lower than that of non-racialized persons in 1996, 13.3% in 2000, and 16% in 2005. And that same trend still continues today. And there was also a gender difference as well. So for instance, between 2000 and 2005, racialized Canadians, so that's all racialized, earned 81.4 cents for every dollar paid to non-racialized Canadians. But the gap is at its worst when you're comparing non-racialized men and racialized women. Racialized women earned 55.6 cents for every dollar non-racialized men earned in 2005. So given the racialized and gender difference, therefore, the minimum income requirement will for sure have a differential impact on these groups as well, particularly on racialized women if they want to sponsor their family. And as I mentioned, as of January 1st, 2014, for Canadian permanent residents and citizens who want to sponsor the family, now it's LICO plus 30%. So if you're a family of four, you want to sponsor your parents, you will need at least $90,000 a year income to sponsor. I don't know how many people in this room actually make that amount of money. And you have to have met that requirement for the last 3 years. So even before the change, it was already difficult for many people to sponsor their parents, and now it's becoming almost impossible. Plus, of course, like you have to all sign up on the first day because there is like a quota of 5,000. You won't get past the first day if you sign up on January 3rd, you're out of luck. So that's one challenge I think people face. And the second, switching gear a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about the citizenship law because it is going to become law soon, and we need to know, what are some of the challenges that will be coming up. So one major change to the Citizenship Act is to increase the residency requirement from the current 3 out of 4 years to 4 out of 6 years. So that means you have to have lived in Canada for 4 years as a permanent resident in order to apply for citizen. And if they don't change the provision, you also cannot count the time before you become permanent residents. Because under the current act, if let's say you came as a refugee or you came as a live-in caregivers, the time you spend before the permanent resident can be counted up to a period of 1 year. And the new act takes that away. So it's going to have a huge impact, particularly on refugees and particularly on live-in caregivers as well, who are, of course, we know like 99% racialized women. And they already had to endure years of hard labor just to get the permanent resident status, and now they have to wait much longer before they can become citizen. The other requirement that has been changed is the language and knowledge requirement. Currently, it applies to applicants between the age of 18 and 54. They're changing that to between age of 14 and 64. That means if you're 55 and above, you now have to be able to speak enough English to pass the language test to get your citizenship. Again, we know that there is a differential experience in education in the home country of many immigrants coming here. There's a huge gender difference because of access to education. It's probably more limited for women than for men, so it is going to affect women as well. And another change, of course, is the fee increase has already taken effect. Now you have to pay $400 to apply if you're an adult. And again, it will have a more impact on low income who are racialized women, and so on and so forth. So in the face of all these horrible changes, are there really things that we can do to try to challenge them? And I think the answer is definitely yes. And I want to propose 5 ways that we can start doing right away. And not all of them requires gigantic, systemic process change at your agency. But, just things that we can start thinking about and start doing it on a day-to-day basis in our interaction with our clients, with our colleagues, and so on. So the first thing I would propose is that I think it's time for immigrant advocates or settlement workers to try to shift the conversation about whether it's family class immigration or whether it's citizenship, from this conversation about privilege. This is, how the government used the language. It's a privilege to bring your family here. It's a privilege to become a citizen. I think we need to change that to one about a right. It's our right to bring our family. It's our right to become Canadian citizen. And even if it's not exactly a right, as a right that is guaranteed or whatever, even if it's something less than a right, it is still something that needs to be accessible to all of us, regardless of our race or gender or disability or low-income status. It is something that should be equally accessible to all. So I think we should start using those kind of language. And secondly, I think we should also start to challenge these different laws directly by using the media. And I think the previous speaker talked about how the use of media is very important, and telling your client's story, and not just in the mainstream media as well. In fact, I think we need to do more, just as much media work within the community, the first language media as well, because as our previous Minister of Immigration, Mr. Jason Kenney, and Stephen Harper, they had they focused a lot on the so-called ethnic vote, right? And so they try to get the media, the ethnic media, to report on their policies without any question. So I think we should start doing the same thing as well. We should do our own propaganda, in the mainstream media and the community media. But also just to get the facts straight, right? It's like, they will be lying about whatever. We just have to set the record straight. The third thing we need to do, I think, is to identify more opportunities for collaboration among community organizations and the legal profession. And unlike BC, we do have a very healthy, still, touch wood, community legal clinic that is funded by Legal Aid Ontario. And there are more and more legal clinic now who is doing immigration law. And so there are actually many examples of how immigration and refugee workers, lawyers, are working with community workers to advocate for change. One example is, of course, the challenge to the interim federal health, the cut to the IFH, the refugee lawyers working with doctors and other shelter, a number of agencies on the challenge. And another example is currently our legal clinic is also working on a challenge to the minimum necessary income requirement for sponsorship. And so we're basically challenging the requirement on the basis that it violates Section 7 of the Charter and Section 15, the Charter of Rights and Freedom. So Section 7 talks about the right to life, liberty, and security. Section 15 is about the equality right. And we're saying that, definitely this is a violation of our client's right to be with their family. And also this right is being this benefit is being denied to people who are low income, and among them more likely to be racialized women and people with disability. And in fact, we are working with OCASI on this child challenge. They will be intervening in the case along with the South Asian Legal Clinic. So, so that's an example of community clinics and community agencies working together. The fourth strategy, which may feel like a waste of time these days, is that we have to continue to make the government know that we are not unhappy, we do not support their policy, whether it's about the new citizenship law or other change. We should as an individual, even if you can't do it as an organization, as an individual, you have right to write to your MP, you have the right to write to your minister, or even to ask to present before the standing committee when these issues come up to raise your concern. And even with this government, sometimes lobbying actually works. So for instance, earlier this year, I was invited to some strange meeting with the Minister of Immigration and Minister on the Status of Women. And they want to talk about how to protect women from domestic violence. So I went there, and there's like an agenda of 5 items. Guess what's the first item? Polygamy. The second item, forced marriage. And the third item, I can't remember what. So the earlier panel talks about how they use trafficking, forced marriage as a way of changing the conversation. And the ultimate goal, of that conversation, later I realized, is that they want to change the requirements on sponsorship of spouse. On the one hand, they want to impose an income requirement on the sponsor. And on the other hand, they want to impose an education and language requirement on the sponsor's spouse. So the idea behind it, as if, what they're saying, what I'm trying to understand is what they're saying is that only poor men beat up their wife, and that if women are well educated and speak English, they won't be abused. So that's sort of, I think, their implication. But, because, unfortunately, actually, at the meeting, there are a couple of the women who were there who support the proposal. But fortunately, they had the standing committee had a, hearing on this matter. A number of us was there to oppose it. And in fact, some of the caucus member of the Conservative were not supportive because they don't want the government to tell them who they should marry, right? It's that individual liberty kind of thing. Well, whatever goes, right? In the end, it did not get passed it didn't get passed to the next stage. So, speaking out can make a difference sometimes. And the fifth thing I think we need to do is to continue to engage with our own family members, our colleagues, allies in this conversation, because there are many who do not agree with what we're saying today, right? We need to kind of, I guess, educate, I don't know if that's the right word, but, engage them in the conversation, about why we think the things are not right. And sometimes we need to do all of the above, all 5 of these things. And an example of that is, I don't have a lot of time, but, the Chinese head tax redress campaign, we worked on it for 20 years. We did media strategy, we did class action lawsuit, we did lobbying, we did media, talking to, our mainstream as well as community newspapers. After 20 years, so the Harper government did apologize and did provide a compensation for the surviving head taxpayers. So it is possible. Of course, sometimes it does take 20 years, but it is possible. Debbie talks about the challenges that immigration settlement sector faces when they dare advocate, right? And that's why I think the coalition work is becoming even more critical, because even when you can't advocate openly, you can still do education, right? We call it education. Charity can do education. So talking about, the laws, how the laws impact your client, that's education. That's not advocating. Telling your communities about what's going on is education. And even if you cannot take the lead on the advocates project, you can support the work with others, right? Such as I'll again use our LICO challenge, the minimum necessary income challenge, as an example. So when we first started the case, we actually went to community agencies and said, can you help us identify clients who would be willing to be the clients for this test case? And that's how we got some of the applicants that came forward. And then later on, we went back to the agency and said, which one of you is willing to provide us with affidavit or information about how the law impact your services and your clients on the ground. As the previous talk about, your experience on the ground is an important source of knowledge. So you can provide those things to those who are advocating, right? So, and then another example is that earlier this year, we actually worked with OCASI and some of the community agencies and legal clinics again to talk about the changes or the ways that, sort of social assistance is being made available to people without status, because of the discrepancy in the way that the law and the policy is being applied among different OW and ODSP offices. Some people facing deportation are being denied social assistance. Again, through this collaboration, we were able to convince ComSoc to actually issue a clarification memo to tell the workers as to how the law should apply, but also to convince the Toronto Social Services to set up a new procedure so that every time someone is denied, there's a central review of that decision. So those are just some concrete examples of how community agency, Theo clinics, lawyers, advocates can work together to make some real change. And I think that we should not sell ourselves short. If we do find the strength and courage to work together and find the effective strategy to work, we will be able to make a difference. Thank you.